I'm Simon Goldman, partner at Albion VC. I'm here with my friend and colleague Amit Nathwani. Thank you for making the time.
It's great to be here, Simon. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Absolutely, no, and really appreciate it. It goes without saying that you've got really quite a rather impressive resume. I'm going to embarrass you slightly here. By reading some of these things out. So graduated medicine from Aberdeen, fellow at the Royal College of Pathologists since '95, PhD in molecular biology in '97, since 2011, Professor of Haematology at UCL, and a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians since 2004, and following becoming a professor at UCL, you became the director of the Catherine Dormandy Haemophilia Centre at the Royal Free, and a senior investigator since then as well. With such an extensive academic career, at what point in that whole arc, did you start to think about commercialization? And the idea of clearly having a clinical population in front of you, but how did you come to the realization that actually commercializing some of the early stage research was actually a prospect? Was there a turning point, or was it a slow transition? How did that journey happen?
I think it's a combination. It's my impatience combined with the experience that we had with the first hemophilia B gene therapy that was licensed at an early stage to Unicure, and then hemophilia A also at a preclinical stage licensed to BioMarin. I realized that you have to be involved with biotech at an early stage if you want to take your drugs to market. That is probably the most efficient, fastest route of getting drugs into clinic so that they're widely available. And that's really been my main driver. I want to create disruptive, novel therapeutics that could change a patient's life. And the key advantage I have is, as a clinician, seeing patients on a daily basis, I realize very quickly how limited current medicine is. And that sort of is the driver behind wanting to create new techniques, new medicines for patients with an unmet need. And so that fuels the enthusiasm for moving forward and working as an entrepreneur with biotechs, creating spin-outs is probably the fastest way forward.
And do you think that that process of getting more and more involved in not only with some of those early stage programs being licensed out, but getting involved with some of those spin-outs yourself, has that changed the way that you actually do your research at an early stage?
It has indeed. It brings discipline into what we're trying to do, because we know that not only do you need very strong foundation to the science you're developing, but we also recognize that it has to go through the regulatory rigor. And, so you have to have the data set that is required to meet the standards for regulatory approval so that you can move forward. And so everything that we do in clinic is with one eye on everything we do in the lab is with one eye to taking it into clinic. And so you, from the very beginning, start thinking about, well, what will the regulators think? What will the investors think? What will the patients think? And these are all important, cogs in the wheel to getting drugs into patients.
Absolutely.
And so I think we start early, and that's learnings that have come through working with biotech, seeing how they develop drugs, and then applying that to the research we do in the lab. Makes us more efficient.
Absolutely, and I think also that patient point is really quite important, and I think somewhere like UCL has a terrific pedigree in terms of that kind of clinical drive to early research. It must be a fantastic experience to actually observe the fruits of those labour when you're actually now treating patients and in some cases curing them of their diseases. How's that experience been for you personally?
It's humbling. It's humbling. As an academic, I had never dreamt that I would be able to take these drugs into clinic and then be able to introduce them into patients myself. And so for the early gene therapy trial, the infrastructure was limited because this was essentially a very new treatment. And so not only did we create it, but I'm then working in a laminar flow hood, reconstituting it before taking it down to the hemophilia center and then administering it into the patients. And then a couple of days later, looking at the effects of the drug in the patients and, thinking, my God, this is working. And that's an amazing experience that I will never forget. And to be able to do this over and over again, I think, has been a very exciting journey. But to see the patient's reactions when the drug's working, it really brings you down to earth. It's just amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. It must be such an amazing experience. And as you said, you've done this a few times now. Tell us about your different experiences. As you say, some of the early commercialization was a license of technology to a partner. How was that experience working directly with a big pharma company, a big biotech company? And how did that experience compare to the spin out of Freeline and your involvement in that? They're obviously they're quite qualitatively different kind of processes, ultimately aiming at the same thing, which is treating patients with these diseases and creating a drug. How did those experiences differ for you?
So really working with Freeline and then recently with NovalGen has been an amazingly different experience compared to what we were doing before. So whilst we licensed our hemophilia B gene therapy technology early to uniQure, they were rather late in developing it, and actually we took it to clinic before they did as an academic study. And doing it as an academic, you're sort of flying solo. And that's very, very difficult. It's really challenging. And there are lots of things that you have to do where you don't feel you have the right sort of experience. And then you fast forward and, start, Freeline Therapeutics as a spin-out supported by Syncona, or NovalGen supported by the Tech Fund and UCL. You know that in those settings, you can get the best people into the company to support you and help you accelerate your programs quickly into
Absolutely.
clinic. And that is an amazing experience. Working with people who have the same mindset but bring in different skills and expertise is just a thrilling experience. That's the best way I can put it. When we started appointing the best of the best in Freeline and NovalGen, you feel, wow, we can do this. Whereas previously, it was with your fingers crossed behind your back thinking, well, maybe we'll get it into clinic.
And I think that's a really important point, is great science doesn't commercialize itself.
No.
And to your point earlier, I think, we're finding that the earlier you get those fantastic people around the table, even at the ideation stage, whether it's great patent attorneys, a great regulatory team, a great clinical team to plan those clinical trials, even when something is still, at a very early preclinical stage, as you say, I think we're increasingly finding that it saves you from having to go back and do things again.
Absolutely.
It saves you time, it saves you money, and you're doing those initial experiments right from the first port of call. I've got to say, it does kind of come as quite of a shock sometimes to people when we're talking about a target or they've produced a bit of novel chemical matter and we're actually having a conversation about reimbursement. And so therefore, what does your phase 3 clinical trial look like? And what are those endpoints that will enable reimbursement? So therefore, what does your phase 2 and your phase 1/2? Therefore, what does your tox package look like? Therefore, what does your preclinical package look like? And actually having those people around the table is just and motivating them. Having motivated people, I think it's it's a team effort. It's very, very interdisciplinary. Do you think you've learned more, yourself in that process? Do you think that the teams still need to, do you think the way that the teams are built these days, say in 2023, are different to what they were, say, 10 years ago?
I think so. I think the teams running companies are much more professional than they were before. and that is required, absolutely required. So you're right, it is an eye-opener when you think of the number of people, the number of teams, the number of experts who are required to develop a drug. It is just absolutely phenomenal. You're right, it's an absolute team effort, and building those teams is critical to the success. So the idea is important, establishing proof of concept is important, but then having a team to allow you to execute and take it all the way to clinic requires essentially a whole village, as it were, to help you develop these programs and take them forward.
Absolutely. I think the earlier we get those people involved, generally, generally the better.
Yeah.
You've had a lot of success, I guess, in moving some of these, some of these things that were ideas that might have come out from your direct interaction with patients through preclinical stages into clinical application, and now even to several marketed drugs. What do you think were your biggest challenges in translating academic work into marketable products?
So just to calibrate, I've had a number of successes, but I've had more failures. But the failures essentially, provide the learnings required to become successful. So, when an idea fails, it's not a complete disaster because you've learned a lot. And so that's very, very important for young people to appreciate and recognize, and essentially builds the possibility of you being successful in the future. And then now, especially for us, because we were lucky in that we were doing things that were completely outside the box. We had to do quite a bit of blue sky thinking to essentially develop ideas and materials that were required for success. But as we move forward, we now find that the gene therapy experts that we need in regulatory or in manufacturing exist, and they can help us or provide us with the support that we need to take it to the next level. And so it's a very different game, starting an idea, doing a first in human clinical trial, to then actually making sure that that goes all the way into clinic. And there are a number of obstacles on the way that you have to navigate with a strong team to ensure that eventually the drugs get to market. Because 90% of ideas fail, and 90% of successful phase 1 clinical trials never make it into a successful drug in clinic. And so you've got to recognize what the issues are and where the problems lie so that you can navigate them. And having a good, strong team of experts that are equal essentially helps you do that very, very effectively.
And so, how would you address that, say, to an early career researcher? Clearly they're very focused. You mentioned, people who are earlier on, who are kind of facing some of these challenges early on, very focused on one topic. Really quite narrow. What would if you kind of talk to yourself, 20, 25 years ago, if you were talking to some of the PhDs and postdocs these days? What would be your recommendations for people who are thinking about the possibility that their work might be commercializable? What would be your advice to some of those people?
My advice would be, one, to believe in the ideas. That's very important, because if you start doubting your own ideas, then it's very difficult for you to articulate and communicate those to the experts in the field. But the second is to start talking to people about those ideas, to see what others feel when you raise those possibilities and how they regard that in terms of tangible options for moving into clinic if it is drug development that you're after. And I've been lucky. Even when I was at medical school, the subject matter that fascinated me the most was drug development, and how do ideas become drugs.
Yep.
And the second thing that sort of impressed me the most when I was at medical school, perhaps because I came to the UK from a developing country, was the idea that you could develop a vaccine and a single administration of that vaccine could protect you for the rest of your life. That was an eye-opener, and it made me feel that most of the drugs that we have available to us are in a way palliation. If you want to create something that is creative and a one-time treatment for patients, then you have to think outside of the box. And that's what we need in medicine these days, is to bring these ideas forward so that we have a one-and-done approach for a variety of different medicines or variety of different medical conditions. I think it's very important.
Absolutely. We talked a lot about great teams and bringing, interdisciplinary groups together. Given that biotech is quite interdisciplinary, were there any particular partnerships or collaborations that you kind of look back on and that you were proud of that really drove some of those products forward?
So, it starts at an early stage in my career, being at St. Jude, having the access to GMP manufacturing facility at St. Jude and the experts around the GMP facility essentially was the key enabler for us to be able to do our phase 1 clinical trial. So that connection has always had a special place for me in my heart. And then coming to UCL in an environment that encourages entrepreneurship, with UCL Business supporting ideas to take them into patent filing, creating a venture arm in the UCL Tech Fund that seeds funds so that you can take those ideas beyond just concepts on paper or early experiments in the lab is very, very important. So the Tech Fund for me has enabled 2 of my spin-out companies, extremely important for us. And UCL as an environment, I think, for me has been crucial because, I could not have done what we've been able to do if I was inundated with a huge amount of clinical work or, administrative responsibilities. So it's an environment that facilitates entrepreneurship and developing new ideas.
And it's that interdisciplinarity which I think really supports that.
Correct. And in medicine, this is the other area where I feel I may have an advantage over others. As a medic, you have to work with interdisciplinary teams, and you have to carry those teams with you for successful outcomes of patients. And so, you learn to work within teams and with teams of equals right from the beginning. And that helps. And the other thing that really helps is this ability to be able to make decisions very quickly. And this is what we do on ward rounds when we see patients. You have to arrive at a decision. And this is part of the training that has helped me become successful in my research, where I know that I cannot ruminate forever on an idea. I have to come to a conclusion or a decision at some point. So that we can move forward to the next step.
Absolutely, and you can research and investigate, the perfect molecule for years if you need to. But at some point, you have to say this is good enough. We need to move forward with that. We can continue to do this in the background, but you've got to choose at some point to actually drive forward.
And so, a part of my clinical training where I felt that, there is a degree of urgency, is essentially working with patients with catastrophic disease. And, every day that goes by, we're going to lose patients. So you can't wait forever to take those drugs from benchside into clinics. You've got to start making those decisions early. But safety is very important. And so that's essentially the bar that we all set ourselves to make sure that we have covered the safety aspects as well as we potentially can before you go into clinic. Now, it's not possible to predict a priori what the safety profile of a drug will be in clinic. And so those early clinical trials are essentially critical for establishing safety and providing you with the foundation to take these drugs forward.
And that's very much been the thesis behind NovalGen, where you're now CEO. Tell us a little bit about NovalGen and what's coming in 2024.
So NovalGen is an exciting immunology company. It's a clinical stage company where one of our products got into clinic in double quick time having learned from my previous experience, fortunately this product has a good efficacy profile supported by a nice level of safety for the patients, and provides the foundation for continuing to innovate in this area of immunotherapy. But in addition to this wonderful drug that we have created, we have an amazing platform. And this platform addresses some of the limitations of immunotherapy that exist across this class of therapeutics, which is showing, amazing responses in patients. But the very mode of action that drives the efficacy is also responsible for toxicity. And so how do you reduce that toxicity without impacting on efficacy? And so for NovalGen, we went back to learnings from nature and realized that we could build response-mediated negative feedback loops into our drugs. Now, response-mediated negative feedback loops are what keeps us alive. They're built into non-biological systems.
It's called homeostasis.
That's right. That's right. But, these feedback loops don't exist in drugs currently. We are going to be the first in 2024 to take a drug forward into clinic that can self-regulate. And you have to pinch yourself when you say that, because this class of drugs does not exist at the moment. And if we can show the clinical proof of concept, then this could be revolutionary. And it's a term that's used very, very lightly. But truly, I think autoregulation, as we call it, or self-regulation, could bring forward a new generation of drugs that are substantially safer for our patients and would enable more patients to benefit from these. Because outside of the ivory, centers of excellence that I work in, it is difficult and a big ask to ask a community-based physician to use some of these immunotherapies because they're associated with frightening toxicity.
They don't have the ability to cope with that.
That's right. And if we can address that, if we can make treatment of cancer or treatment of a number of immunological conditions as an outpatient-based treatment, then it doesn't take a genius to work out that more patients are going to benefit because you can have wider use, a wider application of these therapies. And that's the platform technology that we would be excited about and proud of in NovalGen.
And excited and proud to be part of that journey with you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It'll be great to see that actually going into clinic in the near future. What do you think, looking back over that whole career, academia, really profound, deep biological investigation, clinical translation, commercialization, what do you think was your biggest challenge?
I think the challenges change with time, to be honest. And so if you ask me now, you would have a biased view that the challenge is essentially making sure that you have the funds to be able to take this forward as a CEO. But in a way, the challenges that we all face in drug creation is being able to learn from what is the current state of the art. So the challenge is to ensure that you're learning all the time so that you can capitalize on new advances. Use the experience that you've accumulated over time to turn those new advances into drugs that could make a big difference for patients. And so continued learning is, I would say, the biggest challenge. People can become quite comfortable with what they have achieved. And I think that's a mistake because that prevents you from applying everything that you have learned throughout your career to ensuring that success and innovation continues.
A healthy degree of skepticism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me that we do develop these drugs, we take them into clinic. The world does move on, and you have to keep innovating. You fundamentally have to keep innovating.
Yeah.
We're looking at there's been a generation of gene therapy 1.0, the AAV gene therapies, the lentiviral gene therapies, only a few of which are now actually marketed drugs, and actually only very, very recently.
Yeah.
Clearly the technology has moved on, and we definitely have to keep running That doesn't mean that just because you've got something out there that you stop. So
Absolutely not. Absolutely, you have to continue to innovate. And look, we live in a very, very exciting time.
absolutely,
With the ability to sequence out the whole of our genome, to be able to understand how biological systems work at a molecular level, is a great advantage. These advantages didn't exist 50 years ago.
absolutely.
And so, it's an exciting time, and provides us with an opportunity to develop new drugs in double quick time. And the vaccines that we have for COVID essentially is a great testimony of what mankind can do in very quick time
Absolutely.
when they're focused.
Absolutely.
And so this is what we want to do, continuing to move forward with NovalGen.
Great. No, really appreciate the comments and the time, Amit.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Looking forward to seeing more success in 2024.
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
I think we have a very exciting year ahead of us.